Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. The great and often forgotten California poet Robinson Jeffers says, "Something within us knows our fates from the first, our ends from the very fountain." There's a poem called The Inhumanist that he wrote where a pelican dies in a house. It crashes through a window. And he says, "Birds have their fates like men. This one destined from the egg to die in a human house." And this attitude that one has a particular fated day and a fated way of dying is prevalent throughout the myths of the Norse gods and heroes and the Norse sagas. But fate in Norse literature is a very personal force. There's nothing impersonal about it whatsoever. It's embodied in the persons of the Norns. This is Old Norse Norn, plural Nornir. And in the poem Völuspá, the first poem in the Poetic Edda, which is our most important source of the myths of the Norse gods and heroes, in stanza 20, the names of the three Norns are given as Skuld, Verðandi, and Urðr. Now, Skuld is related to the English word should. You could read this as debt or ought or should, at any rate what ought to happen. Verðandi simply means happening or becoming. And Urðr is related to the past tense of the same verb this is formed to. Urðr is essentially etymologically what has happened, what has become. Now, this word is often rendered by translators and by commentators on Norse myth as Wyrd, W-Y-R-D. I think this is a bad idea because Wyrd is an Old English word rather than an Old Norse word. These two words are from one root. The old Proto-Germanic root from which both words descend would be something like Wyrðis, with the typical loss of W before a Y or U in Old Norse. That's something I've discussed in my video about Old Norse sound changes. So these are the same word in origin, and I think that it just confuses things to use the Old English word in place of the Old Norse word. The Old English word is seen frequently in the poem Beowulf, as well as in some other shorter poems of Old English literature. But in Beowulf, Wyrd, fate, or you could almost translate it more like chance in Beowulf, often is an impersonal force. This is not a goddess or goddess-like figure like it is in Old Norse. Wyrd is not a will. Wyrd is just a force. When Beowulf says, "Wyrd of nereth unfegne thone his elendech," which is translated in the 13th Warrior very nicely as luck often enough will save a man when his courage holds. It doesn't seem that he's referring to Wyrd as any kind of goddess, because Beowulf is at its core a Christian poem. It does not ever reference Jesus Christ himself, but the frame of reference, including some specific references to the Old Testament, is very Christian. So there's no room in Beowulf for this personal deity, which is, however, discussed in Old Norse literature very frequently. Urðr is mentioned a lot more than her sisters, Skuld and Verðandi, in Old Norse. Her name comes up, for instance, in the name of the well that they live by under the tree Yggdrasil. This well is called Urðarbrunnr, that is, well of Urðr. And in a famous stanza in Völuspá, where their names are given, stanza 20, the text reads, "Þaðan koma maujar, margs vitandi, þrjár úr þeim sé, þoli stendur. Urð hetu eina, aðra verðandi, skoru og skíði, skuld ina þriðju. Þær logðu, þær líf kuru, aldabornum, urlog segja." So from there, Þaðan, and this is from under the tree where the well is, come women, moyar meaning specifically virgin women, young women, margs vitandi, knowing much, three of them, thrior or thame sat out of that water. untholi stender, which stands under the tree. Urð hetu eina, they called Urð one, Aðra Verðandi, a second one, the second one Verðandi. Skoru oskidi, they cut on a stick. Skuld and a thriðju, Skuld the third. Thar logðu, they laid down what is laid down. This also means laws. Thar líf kuru, they chose lives. Alda bornum, for the children of men, for men. Urlog segja, the fates of men. The last word there, segja, spelled with a capital G, which in Old Norse manuscripts means double G. You could also read it with a single G, and then it would be, they say, fates. Notice a few things about this passage that I just read, which is the main mention of the Norns, the most detailed mention of the Norns anywhere in Norse literature. Snorri knew it and rephrased it in his prose Edda, but he's not really an independent source because we can tell he's relying on Völuspá. So notice that they are carving fates. Skoru o skidi, they carved on a stick or plank. Ski, this is actually the word that will become ski. They're not weaving. The Moirai, the Greek goddesses of fate, who are also three women, are portrayed as weaving, but that's not the classic Old Norse image of the Norns. That does not mean that they might never have been represented as weaving. In fact, one of the main words or classes of words for fate, Alna Urðr, seems to be related to an old word for weaving, but they're not. The actual Norns themselves are not portrayed as using weaving technology like the Moirai are. Another thing to notice is that the word Wyrd related to Urðr is used in Old English to mean fate, the thing that the Norns decide, but in Old Norse, her name, Urðr, is just her name. This is not used for fate itself, so someone's fate is not his Urðr, right? Or, you know, the fate that will affect us all is not the Urðr, it is something decided by Urðr. The words that are actually used for fate itself, there's actually a few of them. One of them was mentioned in that very stanza, it's urlog. So log is what's laid down. Is a prefix meaning out of, so almost what is laid down out of, maybe out of the judgment of the Norns, you could think. Anyone who speaks Dutch will notice that this is very similar to the Dutch word for war, oorlog. This is probably not a coincidence. It's actually kind of hard to say which one of these meanings might come first, the fate meaning or the war meaning. Either one could be the thing laid down from out of judgment or something like that. It is quite possible this compound dates to Proto-Germanic and that it has just survived with slightly different meanings in its Dutch and Norse forms. There's also the very similar alder log. Log is just the singular form of log, something laid down, and alder is a lifetime, so the lifetime laid down for someone. Another word for fate is skop. This is another plural. This is the shapes, the things shaped, presumably shaped by the Norns. And then I also mentioned this word auðna or Urðr. This is very frequently used in Old Norse whenever fate is discussed in an abstract sense. The two words mean the same thing. They're formed from the same root with different suffixes, and they are probably related to an old word for weaving. So throughout the corpus of Norse poetry and the sagas, these words are used for fate, and very often they're used for fate together with mention of the Norns. So often, you'll see the skop of the Norns, Norna, meaning of the Norns. For instance, at the end of the poem Hamdismál in the Poetic Edda, Sorley says, in stanza 30, Kveld lifir maður ekki eftir kvið Norna. A man does not live a single evening after the decree of the Norns. So the decree of the Norns is another way of putting fate. Or when Sigurður dies in the saga of the Volsungs, and he says, Engi mól við skopum vinna. No man can fight against fate. Skopum, from this root skop in its state of plural form. Or at the end of the saga of Hervor and Heiðrek, where Angantyr has killed his brother Hlodr, and he is decrying the fates for this. He says, "Illr Dómur Norna." The judgment of the Norns, the Dómur of the Norns is evil, is bad. Illr. Other words for shaping are often used in association with Norns. In the poem Reginsmál and the Poetic Edda, when Loki encounters the dwarf living as a fish named Andvari, Andvari says, "Eumlík Norn skop oss í ordaga at ek skylda í vatni vada." A miserable Norn shaped me in early days that I would have to wade in the water, go in the water. This is interesting because the Norn who is blamed for this is actually said to be an adjective that typically implies that she herself is miserable. And that does seem to go along with something that Snorri mentions in the Prose Edda, which is that happy people have happy Norns, miserable people have miserable Norns. So if you were born with with a silver spoon in your mouth and everything goes your way and you fail up, then you have a good Norn who's watching over you. But if everything goes wrong for you, then you have a miserable Norn who's going to be making you miserable. But of course, this seems kind of incompatible with the notion that there's just three Norns like we encounter in Völuspá, which Snorri himself repeats. It seems that there were sort of two levels of Norns, or maybe there was some variation in belief from place to place, where in some places there were considered to be three major Norns, and in other places the Norns were considered to be much more various and numerous. In the poem Fofnismál, after Sigurður has given the dragon Fofnir his mortal wound, he starts asking him trivia questions, as one does after one has murdered someone. And he asks him about the Norns, and Fofnir replies in stanza 13, "Sundur bornar mjök segi ek Nornir vera, egu þær at saman. Sumar eru oskungar, sumar olkungar, sumar duttur dvalins." So, very differently born, Sundur bornar, I say the Norns are. Egu þær at saman, they don't have a family together. They don't share a family connection. Some are Aesir family, some are elf family, some are daughters of Dvalin, who is a prototypical dwarf, i.e. they are dwarves. That's very curious. Does this mean that that one of the Aesir has one of these Aesir Norns? Does that mean that an elf, whatever an elf really is, has an elf Norn, a dwarf has a dwarf Norn? Or does this mean that different people might have elf-born Norns, or dwarf-born Norns, or Aesir-born Norns? It's not clear, and it's not clear that Snorri necessarily understands this stanza perfectly, and this is probably where he's getting his information that gives us about some people having good Norns and some people having bad Norns. Alright, it's pretty much the only time I have to make these videos is right at the beginning of the morning when the sun is coming up, so I'm moving into this corner for the end of this video so that I don't suffer corneal damage. At any rate, this notion that there is a particular date of death seems to run throughout Norse literature. For instance, we saw in that quote from Hamnismál that a man will not live one evening after the decree of the Norns. Or as Sigurður says after he's killed the dragon Fofnir, no one will live past eins eina dags, that one day. So what this seems to be, what you can read out of quotations and scenes like this, is this notion that there's a particular calendar date that every person carries inside him or herself, and that is the day that that person is going to die, no matter what. So for instance, let's say that my fated death day, that one day for me, is the day I'm making this video, August 2nd, 2017. So what that means is, if nothing else kills me, at 11:59 p.m. I'm going to be sitting in bed, and a piano is going to fall through the floor from the apartment above me and crush my head and kill me. That being the case, if this is my fated day, and of course I don't know what day is my fated day, right? That's part of it. I don't know that August 2nd is it. Let's say that I'm walking down the street at some point today, and Berkeley being basically YouTube the city, there's always someone insulting random strangers. So let's say that someone insults me, and, I have the option to decide to have a fist fight with him or not. Well, normally I would probably decide not to have a fist fight with him because 2017 America has laws against assault and battery. But in medieval Norse society, I have a strong incentive to defend my honor against anyone who insults me, right? To assert that I'm drengr, that I'm honorable and bold. And of course, part of that is, in fact, this notion that I have a particular day I'm going to die. If this is the day I'm going to die, and I launch into a flurry of fists against this guy, and we fight, and I live through that fight, then I wasn't going to die today anyway, no matter what I did. So if I had, in fact, gone back to my apartment and gone to sleep and not died, then the fight wouldn't have killed me either, right? This wasn't my fated death day. So I was a coward avoiding a fight that I would have survived anyway because this wasn't my death day. But on the other hand, if I launch into a flurry of fists and I fight this guy and he kills me, I go to Valhalla, right? So it's win-win. If this was my fated death day and I hadn't had that fight and I died anyway, then I was a coward avoiding a fight that would have sent me to Valhalla instead of to hell, right? The way to go to the more desirable afterlife is to die fighting. So this notion of the inevitable death day plays right along with this culture's insistence on a very hyper-martial, very macho, drengr code of reckless courage, because any given day could be the day that I'm going to die. So why ever avoid a fight when fighting is the way to get to the good afterlife? And if I don't die in the fight, I wasn't going to die anyway. If I do die in the fight, I died the best way that I could, right? Now, it's not often that a god or a hero actually knows his date of death or how his death is going to come, but sometimes he does. For instance, in the saga of the Volsungs and some of the poems that it's based on in the Poetic Edda, the hero Sigurður does know his fate. In the poem Gripispall in the Poetic Edda, which is also briefly retold in the saga of the Volsungs, Sigurður encounters his uncle Gripir, who is said to be Auðkendr. He is acquainted with fate. And Gripir tells him, blow for blow, what's coming for Sigurður in his future. And this includes how he's going to fall in love with Brynhildr and then later be forced to forget her magically. How he is going to be married to Gudrun and then be betrayed by her brothers and murdered by them. Sigurður knows all of this, and yet he leaves Gripir's place and goes out and just fulfills that prophecy. It does not seem that he's been given some kind of potion of forgetfulness. I mention that because there is a potion of forgetfulness that makes him forget Brynhildr. It just seems that having learned his fate, he knows better than to try to fight it. That if he tried to do something to change it, that it would happen somehow anyway. The god Odin does try to change his fate. He knows, thanks to the poem Völuspá in the Poetic Edda, that he'll be killed by the wolf Fenrir at Ragnarok. And he does cause war, cause men to kill each other, and then collect the best warriors from battlefields so that he can gather a great army to himself in Valhalla. But at the end, it will be as if all of this was for nothing because he's just going to be killed by the wolf at Ragnarok anyway. That's his fated death day. And the message one can take from all of this is that there is no sense in fighting fate, and therefore there's a little bit of comfort in it, right? Because if I have an inevitable death day, there's no reason to worry about anything. I'm just going to die when I die. That's when it was fated from the very beginning, right? The Norns chose my fate, just like at the beginning of the poem Helga Kviða Hundingsbana 1 in the Poetic Edda. The Norns appear at the birth of the hero Helgi, and they have what the poem calls Urlogþættir, fate threads, which also in the same stanza is called a gulin sima, a golden thread. These threads are tied in some way. They're spread around the baby. He's going to be a king, so it seems like they're used to sort of mark the territory that he's going to rule. But at any rate, his fate is fixed by the Norns at the very beginning, just like all of our fates are. And thus, why worry, right? If there's some kind of reckless risk that I'm considering taking, why not take it? If I don't take it and I don't die, well, I wouldn't have died if I took the risk. If I do take the risk, perhaps then I'll live on as a legend, right? Perhaps I'll be remembered for being very Drangar, for being bold and honorable. And so there's a lot of motivation to display courage regardless of the possibly negative consequences of doing so. And I think that we need to appreciate what a central, defining core tenet of this culture that is. All right, well, I hope that this has been somewhat informative for you. I make these videos available for free because I don't believe that knowledge does anyone any good locked in an ivory tower or behind archaic language. And I also don't think that the experts do themselves any good by talking only to other experts. When experts don't talk to the general public about their fields of interest, the cranks take over and they talk, and bad information gets out. So I'd like to do my part to just talk in an informed way about subjects that I know a lot about and present it without any kind of political or religious agenda, and just try to inform people. If I have an agenda, it's that I want you to look at my books. I hope that you'll check out my translation of the Poetic Edda and of the Saga of the Volsungs that's just come out. Both of these present these central, important Norse texts in contemporary English and a dynamic style that is unlike other translations. I also have a Patreon page where if you pledge as little as $1 a month, you get the ability to ask me for translations. You get access to some cool treats that I have for Patreon supporters, like a rune font that I've done, some exclusive translations of Norse myths that I've done just for Patreon supporters, and other fun things like that. For now, from the University of California, Berkeley, I'm wishing all of you a cheerful Norn.